Hello, and thank you for joining us here at the Public Domain Library for our new series called The Detectives Book Club. We will be reading public domain mysteries together. More like I will be reading public domain mysteries aloud to you, and we will be attempting to solve them together. So this isn't quite like an audiobook because we will be having immersive and relaxing sounds and soundscapes, but also comments and commentary and theorizing about the stories at hand. For our first in the series, we figured why not start with an icon of the genre, Agatha Christie. And this is The Secret of Chimneys by Agatha Christie, which I have never before read, and I don't even know what it is about. So here we begin with Chapter 1, Anthony Cade signs on. Gentleman Joe, why if it isn't old Jimmy McGrath, Castle's select tour, represented by 7 depressed-looking females and 3 perspiring males, looked on with a considerable interest. Evidently their Mr. Cade had met an old friend. They all admired Mr. Cade so much. His tall, lean figure, his sun-tanned face, the light-hearted manner with which he settled disputes and cajoled them all into good temper. This friend of his now, surely rather a peculiar-looking man, about the same height as Mr. Cade, but thick-set and not nearly so good-looking, the sort of man read about in books, who probably kept a saloon. Interesting, though. After all, that was what one came abroad for, to see all these peculiar things one read about in books. Up to now, they had been rather bored with Bulawayo. The sun was unbearably hot. The hotel was uncomfortable. There seemed to be nowhere particular to go until the moment one should arrive to motor to the Matapos. Very fortunately, Mr. Cade had suggested picture postcards. There was an excellent supply of picture postcards. Anthony Cade and his friend had stepped a little apart. "What the hell are you doing with this pack of females?" demanded McGrath. "Starting a harem?" "Not with this little lot," grinned Anthony. "Have you taken a good look at them?" "I have that. Thought maybe you were losing your eyesight." "My eyesight's as good as it ever was. No, this is a Castle Select tour." "I'm Castle. The local Castle, I mean." "What the hell made you take on a job like that?" "A regrettable necessity for cash. I can assure you it doesn't suit my temperament." Jimmy grinned. "Never a hog for regular work, were ya?" Anthony ignored this aspersion. "However, something will turn up soon, I expect," he remarked hopefully. "It usually does." Jimmy chuckled. "If there's ever any trouble brewing, Anthony Cade is sure to be in it sooner or later. I know that. You've an absolute instinct for rows, and the 9 lives of a cat. When can we have a yarn together?" Anthony sighed. "I've got to take these cackling hens to see Rhodes' grave." "That's the stuff," said Jimmy approvingly. "They'll come back bumped blue and black with the ruts in the road and clamoring for bed to rest the bruises on. Then you and I will have a spot or 2 and exchange the news." "Right. So long, Jimmy." Anthony rejoined his flock of sheep. Miss Taylor, the youngest and most skittish of the party, instantly attacked him. "Oh, Mr. Cade, was that an old friend of yours?" "It was, Miss Taylor. One of the friends of my blameless youth." Miss Taylor giggled. "I thought he was such an interesting-looking man." "I'll tell him you said so." "Oh, Mr. Cade, how can you be so naughty? The very idea! What was that name he called you?" "Gentleman Joe?" "Yes. Is your name Joe?" "I thought you knew it was Anthony, Miss Taylor." "Oh, go on with you," cried Miss Taylor coquettishly. Anthony had by now well mastered his duties. In addition to making the necessary arrangements of travel, that they included soothing down irritable old gentlemen when their dignity was ruffled, seeing that elderly matrons had ample opportunities to buy picture postcards, and flirting with everything under a Catholic 40 years of age. The last task was rendered easier for him by the extreme readiness of the ladies in question to read a tender meaning into his most innocent remarks. Miss Taylor returned to the attack. "Why does he call you Joe, then?" "Oh, just because it isn't my name." "And why Gentleman Joe?" "The same kind of reason." "Oh, Mr. Cade," protested Miss Taylor, much distressed, "I'm sure you wouldn't say that. Papa was only last saying what gentlemanly manners you had." "Very kind of your father, I'm sure, Miss Taylor. And we were all agreed that you were quite the gentleman." "I'm overwhelmed." "No, really, I mean it." "Kind hearts are more than coronets," said Anthony vaguely, without a notion of what he meant by the remark, and wishing fervently that it was lunchtime. "That's such a beautiful poem, I always think. Do you know much poetry, Mr. Cade?" "I might recite 'The boy stood on the burning deck' at a pinch." "The boy stood on the burning deck, whence all but he had fled." "That's all I know, but I can do that bit with action if you like. The boy stood on the burning deck. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The flames, you see. Whence all but he had fled. For that bit I run to and fro like a dog." Miss Taylor screamed with laughter. "Oh, do look at Mr. Cade. Isn't he funny?" "Time for morning tea," said Anthony briskly. "Come this way. There is an excellent cafe in the next street." "I presume," said Mrs. Caldecott in her deep voice, "that the expense is included in the tour?" "Morning tea, Mrs. Caldecott," said Anthony, assuming his professional manner, "is an extra." "Disgraceful." "Life is full of trials, isn't it?" said Anthony cheerfully. Mrs. Caldecott's eyes gleamed, and she remarked with the air of one springing a mine, "I suspected as much, and in anticipation I poured off some tea into a jug at breakfast this morning. I can heat that up on the spirit lamp. Come, father." Mr. and Mrs. Caldecott sailed off triumphantly to the hotel, the ladies back complacent with successful forethought. "Oh, Lord," muttered Anthony, "what a lot of funny people it does take to make a world." He marshaled the rest of the party in the direction of the cafe. Miss Taylor kept by his side, and resumed her catechism. "Is it a long time since you saw your friend?" "Just over 7 years." "Was it in Africa you knew him?" "Yes, not this part, though. The first time I ever saw Jimmy McGrath, he was all trussed up, ready for the cooking pot. Some of the tribes in the interior are cannibals, you know. We got there just in time." "What happened?" "Very nice little shindy. We potted some of the beggars, and the rest took to their heels." "Oh, Mr. Cade, what an adventurous life you must have led." "Very peaceful, I assure you." But it was clear that the lady did not believe him. It was about 10 o'clock that night when Anthony Cade walked into the small room where Jimmy McGrath was busy manipulating various bottles. "Make it strong, James," he implored. "I can tell you I need it." "I should think you did, my boy. I wouldn't take on that job of yours for anything." "Show me another, and I'll jump out of it fast enough." McGrath poured out his own drink, tossed it off with a practiced hand, and mixed a second one. Then he said slowly, "Are you in earnest about that, old son?" "About what?" "Chucking this job of yours if you could get another." "Why? You don't mean to say that you've got a job going begging? Why don't you go grab it yourself?" "I have grabbed it, but I don't much fancy it. That is why I'm trying to pass it on to you." Anthony became suspicious. "What's wrong with it? They haven't engaged you to teach in a Sunday school, have you?" "Do you think anyone would choose me to teach in a Sunday school?" "Not if they knew you well, certainly." "It's a perfectly good job. Nothing wrong with it whatsoever." "Not in South America, by any chance?" "I've rather got my eye on South America. There's a very tidy little revolution coming off in one of those little republics soon." McGrath grinned. "You always were keen on revolutions. Anything to be mixed up in a really good row." I feel my talents might be appreciated out there, I tell you. Jimmy, I can be joyfully useful. I can be jolly useful in a revolution, to one side or the other. It's better than making an honest living any day. I think I've heard that sentiment from you before, my son. No, the job isn't in South America. It's in England. England? Return of hero to his native land after many years. They can't dun you for bills after 7 years, can they, Jimmy? I don't think so. Well, are you on for hearing more about it? I'm on, all right. The thing that worries me is why you're not taking it on yourself. I'll tell you. I'm after gold, Anthony. Far up in the interior. Anthony whistled and looked at him. Would be cooler if I could whistle. You've always been after gold, Jimmy. Ever since I knew you. It's your weak spot. Your own particular little hobby. You followed up more wildcat trails than anyone I know. And in the end, I'll strike it. You'll see. Well, everyone's his own hobby. Mine's vows. Yours is gold. I'll tell you the whole story. I suppose you know all about Czechoslovakia. Anthony looked up sharply. Czechoslovakia, he said, with a curious ring in his voice. Yes. Know anything about it? 1 second. I'm getting some water. You know, but the entire way of entering into the public domain is 95 years after publication. And yeah, sometimes these stories are outdated in a lot of ways, and I'm not trying to hold them accountable to changes from, obviously, if I write a novel, it could be the most of its time novel, but eventually it will be of its time, so, but anyway, very first impression, 7 pages in, I wonder if somehow Anthony is the bad guy, you know what I mean, like, he might be the main character, but I definitely don't trust this guy, and I certainly don't trust Jimmy. Although, if it was Murder, She Wrote rules, then maybe Mrs. Caldecott would be the villain? No, Mrs. Caldecott would be the victim if it was Murder, She Wrote rules, because whoever is the most rude person usually is the victim. And I personally would look at Anthony and Jimmy as being rude, but I can tell from the text that so far the only person to be openly rude was Mrs. Caldecott. So maybe she will be murdered for her wealth because she is a penny pincher. We will see. We will see. Czechoslovakia, he said with a curious ring in his voice. Yes. Know anything about it? There was quite an appreciable pause before Anthony answered. Then he answered slowly. Only what everyone knows. It's one of the Balkan states, isn't it? Principal rivers unknown. Principal mountains also unknown, but fairly numerous. Capital, Bucharest. Population, chiefly brigands. Hobby, assassinating kings and having revolutions. Last king, Nicholas IV. Assassinated about 7 years ago. Since then it's been a republic. Altogether a very likely spot. You might have mentioned before that Czechoslovakia came into it. It doesn't accept indirectly. Anthony gazed at him more in sorrow than in anger. You ought to do something about this, James, he said. Take a correspondence course or something. If you told a story like this in the good old Eastern days, you'd have been hung up by the heels and bastinoed, or something equally unpleasant. Bastinadoed, perhaps? I will have to look it up. I love learning a new word. Jimmy pursued his course quite unmoved by these strictures. Ever heard of Count Stipletich? Now you're talking, said Anthony. Many people who have never heard of Czechoslovakia would brighten at the mention of Count Stipletich, the grand old man of the Balkans, the greatest statesman of modern times, the biggest villain unhung, The point of view all depends on which newspaper you take in, but be sure of this, Count Stipletitch will be remembered long after you and I are dust and ashes, James. Every move and counter-move in the Near East for the last 20 years has had Count Stipletitch at the bottom of it. He's been a dictator and a patriot and a statesman, and nobody knows exactly what he has been except that he's been a perfect king of intrigue. Well, what about him? He was Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia. That's why I mentioned it first. You've no sense of proportion, Jimmy. Czechoslovakia is of no importance at all compared to Stipletitch. It just provided him with a birthplace and a post in public affairs, but I thought he was dead. So he is. He died in Paris about 2 months ago. What I'm telling you about happened some years ago. The question is, said Anthony, what are you telling me about? Jimmy accepted the rebuke and hastened on. It was like this. I was in Paris, just 4 years ago to be exact. I was walking along one night in rather a lonely part, when I saw half a dozen French toughs beating up a respectable-looking old gentleman. I hate a one-sided show, so I promptly butted in and proceeded to beat up the toughs. I guess they'd never really been hit before. They melted like snow. Good for you, James, said Anthony softly. I'd like to have seen that scrap. Oh, it was nothing much, said Jimmy modestly, but the old boy was no end grateful. He'd had a couple, no doubt about that, but he was sober enough to get my name and address out of me, and he came along and thanked me the next day. Did the thing in style, too. It was then that I found out it was Count Stipletitch I rescued. He'd got a house up by the boys. Anthony nodded. Yes, Stipletitch went to live in Paris after the assassination of King Nicholas. They wanted him to come back and be president later, but he wasn't taking any. He remained sound to his monarchical principles, though he was reported to have his finger in all the backstairs pies that went on in the Balkans. Very deep, the late Count Stipletitch. Nicholas the Fourth was the man who had a funny taste in wives, wasn't he? Said Jimmy suddenly. Yes, said Anthony, and it did it for him too, poor beggar. She was some little gutter snipe of a music hall artiste in Paris, not even suitable for a morganatic alliance, but Nicholas had a frightful crush on her, and she was all out for being a queen. Sounds fantastic, but they managed it somehow. Called her the Countess Popovsky, or something, and pretended she had Romanov blood in her veins. Nicholas married her in the cathedral at Bucharest with a couple of unwilling archbishops to do the job. She was crowned as the Queen Viraga. Nicholas squared his ministers, and I suppose he thought that was all that mattered, but he forgot to reckon with the populace. They're very aristocratic and reactionary in Czechoslovakia. They like their kings and queens to be the genuine article. There were mutterings and discontent, and the usual ruthless oppressions, and the final uprising which stormed the palace, murdered the king and queen, and proclaimed a republic. It's been a republic ever since, but the things still manage to be pretty lively there, so I've heard. They've assassinated a president or two just to keep their hand in, but revenons à nos moutons. You've got to go where Count Stipletitch was hailing you as his preserver. Yes, well, that was the end of that business. I came back to Africa and never thought of it again until about 2 weeks ago. I got a queer-looking parcel which had been following me all over the place for Lord knows how long. I had seen in a paper that Count Stipletitch had recently died in Paris. Well, this parcel contained his memoirs, or reminiscences, or whatever you'd call the things. There was a note enclosed to the effect that if I delivered the manuscript at a certain firm of publishers in London on or before October 13th, they were instructed to hand me £1,000. £1,000? Did you say £1,000, Jimmy? I did, my son. I hope to God it's not a hoax. Put not your trust in princes or politicians, as the saying goes. Well, there it is. Owing to the way the manuscript has been following me around, I had no time to lose. It was a pity all the same. I'd just fixed up this trip to the interior, and I'd set my heart on going. I shan't get such a good chance again. You're incurable, Jimmy. £1,000 in the hand is worth a lot of mythical gold. And supposing it's all a hoax? Anyway, here I am, passage booked and everything, on the way to Cape Town, and then you blow along. Anthony got up and lit a cigarette. I begin to perceive your drift, James. You go gold hunting as planned, and I collect the £1,000 for you. How much do I get out of it? What do you say to a quarter? £250 free of income tax, as the saying goes. That's it. Done, and just to make you gnash your teeth, I'll tell you that I would have gone for 100. Let me tell you, James McGrath, you won't die in your bed counting up your bank balance. Anyway, it's a deal. It's a deal, all right, I'm on. And Confusion to Castle Select Tours. They drank the toast solemnly. So, I'm guessing the secret of Chimneys will be that he goes to this estate and maybe finds some secret passageways. That seems very of its time. It's something I really miss, is secret passageways and such in our media in general. That's actually part of why I chose this particular book. I have never read it, but it's called The Secret of Chimneys, and it reminded me of the Nancy Drew book, The Case of the Hidden Staircase, I think is what it's called. The Case of the Hidden Staircase, maybe it's not correct. Maybe it's The Case of the Hidden Stairwell, or something along those lines. I believe it's the very first Nancy Drew book. Anyway, let's go on to chapter 2.